Ah! Spoopy.
Welcome everyone to our Spoopy special for Halloween, the favorite holiday of every weird internet person you don't really want to associate with. Honestly though, while I do enjoy Halloween, it's never been that big a deal for me, and as an adult, most of my Halloweens have consisted of buying Halloween candy a while in advance, eating too much of it, having to buy more, eating too much of that, and thinking, you know what, I should watch a scary movie before forgetting and watching The Hobbit for the umpteenth time, but I guess that's scary in its own way. Heyo! But there's something else to celebrate this month, something far more special. Maybe just a bit more stinky than an adult man in a Halloween costume. And that is Orctober. And what better way to celebrate the most glorious season than a little return to our favorite northern wasteland, ANGMAR. In my tournament vlog, you may remember me mentioning that the main thing my army was missing was speed. As other than my mounted ring wraith and a captain with heroic march, ain't nothing on that list moving faster than 6 inches, so it was time to call in the dogs. So yes, we're going to be building some warg riders for my army, a plan I've been brewing in the back of my mind for quite a while now, and which seemed just too perfect for a freaky holiday treat as man, we're going to make them weird. First thing we had to sort though were the wargs, as the plastic GW wargs can just get out of here. Otherwise, the original medals are great, but they're just too expensive and hard to come by, and while I do love the Fel Warg models, Fel Wargs are a distinct different breed from our regular Wolfie pups with different rules, and so I didn't want to mix them up. So we had to come up with something else entirely, and while I did consider the most popular option of the Fenrisian Wolves, I find them a bit too cartoony and still not quite cheap enough for how much work I would need to do. Then I remembered an old conversion I saw online years ago using the Warhammer Fantasy Chaos Warhounds, and just how weird it looked. So with that, I was hooked. About a whole pile of used ones online. I also really like the more monstrous look of the Lord of the Rings wargs over the Hobbit ones, and so the bulky proportions on these worked perfectly for me. And while I love some of the weird spikes and scale details on them, some of the more outlandish stuff like antlers and scorpion tails just wouldn't quite work, so I popped those off. This left me with big holes where the horns were, so I quickly filled those in with green stuff, sculpting in a quick fur texture on top before sculpting new ears onto the head. I did salvage some ears from the horns I cut off, but the vast majority were all done from scratch. I also didn't film it, but I did replace some of the weird tails with some green stuff, and stuck to a bare naked tail rather than giving it hair. I also redid the eyes to give them more of that hyena look from the movies. And I did this by first rolling up a tiny ball of green stuff and sticking them onto the faces. Then once they were dry, I took little strips of putty and laid them over as eyelids, which I then simply blended onto the surrounding area. While I won't be painting them here, I did do a quick test one ages ago and went for a really sickly balding look, which really raw exposed skin to add the weird and twisted vibe I wanted for these. And speaking of weird and twisted, I wanted to give a big shout out to my newest patrons. But seriously, you guys are great, and I don't thank you enough for all the support you've shown me. In particular today, I wanted to thank our 2 newest members, John and Richard, as I'm just so happy to have both of you along for the ride. And if anyone wants to get in on our little blooming community, hop over onto the page via the link below and take a look around, as we'd not only love to have you, but you'll also get a set of exclusive dice. And know that you'll be directly helping out and supporting this channel. But that's enough of that, let's get back to the project at hand. With the wolves all done, it was time to turn to the orcs riding them, and I had a particular style in mind for this. I wanted these guys to look really wild, as if they've been living exclusively isolated out in the woods and have gravitated toward these packs of wargs for protection. So I'm going for a no metal look and limited armor with lots of wood and bone mixed in. I was particularly inspired once again by some of the Hobbit concept art, such as the totally weird original look for the Hunter Orcs, the armored Goblin Mercenaries from the Battle of the Five Armies, and the Gundabad Berserkers. For gameplay, I also wanted these guys to have throwing spears, but I've always kind of been bugged by throwing spears in game, as the models never have more than one spear, so where do the rest come from? Which made me think of the orcs from the Shadow of X Lord of the Rings video games, which, unsurprisingly, I love. There's a class of orc enemy in that called Hunters that mainly throw spears, but they also have a set of them stashed on their back, which gives them this really cool and unique look, which I wanted to bring into the figures. I did one test model up, and while I did like how he turned out, he was a bit much, and ended up a bit too bulky, so I tried to bring it back for the rest of them. I wanted these guys to be pretty lithe and actiony, so I mainly used the torsos from the Hail Caesar Celtic warriors, sticking orc heads and arms onto them before attaching lots of bones and spikes from the Citadel skull box and leftover stuff I had, like the larger horns I cut off with the wargs. I wanted to push my green stuff working here a bit too, and for some bits I actually sculpted the bodies from scratch, as I would be adding so much stuff over top. Some I even gave skull helmets by cutting both the skull and the head in half and sticking them together. And for the legs, I mainly used the Warlords of Erewhon orcs, but they were a bit wide, so I sliced out a sliver of the middle and then reattached them to better fit the waistline of my boys. Speaking of slicing, quick note, be careful with your knives, as I definitely nicked myself a couple of times here. So yeah, be careful, because I definitely was not. Made sure to have all the bones and spikes pointing forward to give them a real sense of movement, and when mounting them to the wargs, I tried to have them mostly leaning pretty far over in a kind of jockey position. Most of the shields I used were either some wood and leather bits from the Warlords of Erewhon sets, but for a couple I actually sculpted them from scratch to go more for the goblin mercenary carapace look. Finally, I was sure to add a couple of spears to each model's back before adding lots of extra fabric, armor, and straps over top to fill them out. I then based them all in a kind of busier version of my normal Angmar bases to give them more of that forestry look with bark, sticks, and some foam flock stuck down before the normal stand mix. Then added some sparring tufts and flock to the models themselves as I've done in the past. There we have it, a full 8 ANGMAR WARG riders. And so that's that. Happy Halloween and Orctober, everyone, and thank you as always for checking this out and sticking an eye till the end. If you're into these kinds of wild conversions, check out our older videos and have a go at it yourself by just grabbing a bunch of kits and slapping them together. We've got a couple more videos in the pipeline ready to go, so the next one should definitely be out a bit quicker than this one. But until then, have a good one all and stay safe. See you next time.